Hello, you dirty potters. How are you today? Today we are finally tackling the topic of chattering. Chattering is an extremely easy technique in which kind of looks like someone just messed up on trimming and figured that it makes an extra cool pattern. And in this video, I'm going to show you guys how to do it. But before we get started, there's a couple of things I need to show you and talk to you about because there's a couple misconceptions in the ceramic art world about what chattering is and how chattering is done. Firstly, I want to show you what chattering actually looks like in slow motion before we get the video started. This is what chattering actually looks like when you slow it down. I feel like many people haven't seen chattering in this way to really conceptualize what chattering actually is, and not only that, for the visual learners, this might help you figure out how to chatter yourselves. The second thing I want to talk to you about is the misconception that you need a chattering tool in order to chatter. I have chattered with a pear trim tool before, I have chattered with the mud trim tools before, I've technically even chattered with a metal rib before. It's all about how you handle your tool while you're chattering and spinning your wheel. But trust and believe, you absolutely do not need to buy a set of chattering tools in order to start your chattering journey. If you have a mud tools tool at home, or if you have a pear trim tool at home, you can very easily do it with these two as well. Don't get me wrong, if you're a real beginner and you're having a hard time chattering, it's way easier to do it with a tool that is meant for chattering. But for those of you who don't have the money or time or availability to go out and get yourselves a chattering tool, these two tools will actually chatter for you. And today I'm going to show you how to at least chatter with this one right here. Number one, you are going to center and batten down whatever you're trimming to your wheel as you would do if you were regularly trimming. Now before you start trimming, there's two things you should probably worry about. Number one, you should probably worry about what you're going to do with this bottom before you start your technique. Some people, I understand, don't trim their bottoms, some people do. I personally do, it's crafting standard for me. So before you start actually chattering, you might want to trim your bottom if you're planning to do that. Chattering is technically gouging little pieces of clay out of your ceramic artwork as you go along, and because of that, if you already throw your bowls a little bit thinner, it's going to make your stuff weaker and weaker over time, which is going to make your stuff a little harder to trim. So I'm going to trim this real fast. Another reason that the high majority of people trim before they start their chattering technique is because you want a relatively smooth surface when you're chattering. If you are practicing the chattering technique, you're probably already in the intermediate phases of your ceramic artwork career. This means that you already know how to make a lot of the forms, including bowls and cups and things of that nature, and you also probably already know how to make your work really smooth with the use of a trim tool or a rib. It's not necessary, don't get me wrong, but it does help if you have a very smooth clay body. Especially if you're beginning chattering, it's really helpful if you don't learn with a super bumpy road. It's kind of like driving. Like if you were just learning how to drive, do you want the smooth road or do you want the super bumpy road? I mean, don't get me wrong, the bumpy road will prepare you better for life if you do make it through, but it will make it all the more difficult. I mean, it sounds kind of messed up, but like seriously, if you don't know how to make a regular bowl like this, you probably shouldn't be chattering. Now there's two main things that you really have to remember when you're chattering. Number one, unlike when I was trimming just a second ago, you probably saw me hold my trim tool really close to the base of the blade that is actually trimming. So when I was trimming, I was holding it way up here, and this is what gives me a lot of stability and allows me to keep that constant pressure that lets me get these nice big long ribbons like this when I'm trimming. This is exactly the opposite of what I want to be doing when I'm chattering. When I'm chattering, I'm actually holding my tool way down here. I'm kind of flimsy with it, to be honest with you. Using this tool is probably a way better example, but when I trim with the Mud Tools trim tool, I usually hold it close to up here, or if I use this side, I'll hold it like this, or I'll hold it like this. all of which I'm holding my stability point way up here near the base of the blade, or near the operative side of whatever I'm actually trimming with, that being the knife or the blade or the trim tool, whatever you want to call it. You really don't want to be holding it way up here. You want to kind of be holding it way down here. Number 2 kind of goes along with number 1. Number 2, you don't want to be putting a lot of pressure on your trim tool. Many of us will trim like this and keep constant high pressure, but this is meant for taking clay off of the body. You don't really need this, you just want to chatter it. So what you're going to do is, instead of doing it at this angle, which is very linear, you're going to be trying to gouge the trim tool into the clay body, which means that instead of holding it like this, you're going to be holding it at this angle instead of this angle. And those are the main factors you really want to worry about whenever you're starting to chatter. If you follow those 3 general rules, you'll probably chatter in no time flat. Rule number 1, you don't technically need a chattering tool in order to do this technique. You can do it with any trim tool. Rule number 2, do not hold the trim tool or whatever you're chattering with way up here at the base. This is for trimming, actual trimming. This means that you're holding constant pressure up here. You don't want that. You're going to be holding it way down here. Potter tip. Once you learn to make chatter marks, practice going down the body as you hold that same pressure. Holding this pressure is the opposite of what I've been teaching you all these years, specifically because if you're chattering your wear, this means that you're basically doing a very light, incorrect version of trimming. Our entire lives while we're trimming, we're taught to keep constant pressure, to hold your fingers with constant pressure at the very base of the operative part of your trim tool, while making sure that it's nice and anchored down. But now, with the chattering technique, I'm basically telling you to hold it all flimsy, and also don't put the blade directly on the clay body. Make sure it's gouging into it as it spins. This is the exact opposite of everything I've been teaching you, except for this one technique. You will know when you're chattering correctly, and you'll know when your tool starts to chatter your clay body, when you start hearing this weird kind of pseudo farting sound. Here, let me do it again for you so you can listen to it. Did you hear that sound? That sound is the sound of your trim tool bouncing rapidly up and down the clay body as it sporadically gouges into the clay body while your wheel is spinning. That is, for a lack of better term, because we don't really have a name for it, the sound of chattering. Hold on, I'm gonna put a little style on this real quick and take this home and make sweet chatter love to it. When you're done chattering, you are, of course, because you're basically gouging your clay body over and over again at high speeds, gonna get these little clay boogers right here, and these are fairly easy to take off. You can either get a very dry brush, or you can get a sponge, and just kind of dust these off as you go, and this will get rid of a high majority of all these little bits and boogers on your clay body. This way it's nice and clean to go on the greenwork shelf. Potter tip. One of the awesome things about chattering is that you can technically get many different chattering patterns out of the same exact tool and the same exact motion. The main difference in getting these different patterns is the speed of your wheel and where you move your trim tool at the time. Check this out. This is my wheel moving at medium speed while I'm chattering. But this is my wheel moving at a much higher speed while I'm chattering on this part of the clay body. Look at how much deeper and different this is in comparison to this. And the only real difference that I made on this is that on this part I went a little bit slower, and on this part I went a little bit faster. This is going to take a little bit of time to get used to because of two reasons. Number one, you're going to have to learn to batten your pottery down really, really well in order to make your pottery go a little bit faster on the wheel so it doesn't fly off into outer space. The second thing is that a lot of you are probably just going to stick to either one or two different trim tools to practice your chattering technique before you get comfortable. Because as I've just shown here, every tool with the same exact angle can produce many different patterns at different speeds. So at this point, this side essentially makes two different patterns at medium and fast, and this side probably makes a whole different pattern, and this tool makes a whole different pattern at medium and fast and slow. So right here by themselves with these two tools, you probably have about 5 or 6 different chattering patterns without even having to buy extra equipment. You probably got some of these tools with your beginner pottery set. Potter truth time, sort of truth, kind of truth. Yes, I do know that I technically said you do not need a real chattering tool in order to chatter a lot of your pottery. But technically speaking, if none of this advice is working for you and you're doing everything I'm saying in this video and it's still not working, buying a chattering tool would be recommended as it makes it way easier. The high majority of chattering tools have this curve just like my mud tools tool does right here. And this makes it extremely easy to make sure that the tool goes against the grain as the pottery spins. This one angle right here really helps out. While technically you don't need that angle, I can very easily chatter with this tool right here. It does technically help to have that angle. If you can chatter with this, you can probably chatter with anything. But having this angle right here really helps go against the grain of the motion of the pottery, or at least the wheel, which is the main thing that is gouging into your clay work, which is making the motion of chattering. But my statement still stands. You don't really need to buy a chattering tool. This is technically not a chattering tool. This is a trim tool. This is definitely not a chattering tool. This is purely a trim tool that doesn't even have the angle on it, but you did just see me make these waves with it, so there, I showed you proof. I don't want to hear you in the comments below, oh, I bought a whole set of chattering tools and now I'm going to be able to chatter. No, if you don't know these basic rules, you probably still can't chatter. Potter tip! There's one major thing that I should probably tell you when doing this technique. There's a lot of people who are going into the intermediate phases right now, as this is technically an intermediate technique. But because of that, much like myself, there's plenty of people who are going through a phase right now where they're trying to get their work to be super thin. And some of you are doing fantastic. Some of you are doing a little too fantastic. Much like myself, when I was going through my intermediate phases, I took much pride in making bowls that were like a pound or a pound and a half. I didn't know that that wasn't exactly crafting standard. All I cared about was making my stuff super thin because I thought it was a modicum of skill. That being said, this is what's gonna happen if you make your clay body a little too thin and you decide to do the chattering technique. Well, thank you, Dirty Potters, for joining me today. I really just wanted to get across the point of those two things to you, because these types of chattering marks are extremely easy to make if you understand those two principles. I feel like a lot of people see other people chatter in classrooms and on YouTube, and all they really see is the trim tool or the chattering tool make contact with the clay body, and they never get to see what's happening not only in slow motion, but they also never really get to see what's happening to the clay body, what's really going on with the form of how you're holding your trim tool, what's going on with how the speed goes. No one ever explains that stuff, even in classrooms that I've been to that teach chattering. I really hope that this tutorial has helped a lot of you guys understand what chattering is, and with those two main things, you should probably be able to chatter fairly easily. Granted, I stick to my guns. I said what I said at the beginning. You absolutely do not need a chattering tool in order to chatter. So if you're one of those people who are like, I must buy chattering tools in order to chatter, I did just show you how to chatter with these two tools with those two basic principles. That being said, if you still can't chatter with those two tools, you're not going to be able to chatter with the other tools that you're probably going to buy offline. But thank you, Dirty Potters, for joining me today. If you want to see any more of my artwork, the links are always down below. The Facebook, the Instagram, the Discord, so you can come bother me and my little furry family down there. If you like this kind of content, give it a like and make sure to subscribe. We're always going to be pumping out videos that are helping beginners and even intermediate people with their ceramic artwork. I love your Dirty Potter faces, and I will see you guys next week. People that use Giffen grips technically can't do this technique in its entirety, because technically speaking, a Giffen grip will usually hold its prongs about here, here, and here. So unless you're only chattering right here, you would have to actively learn how to not use a Giffen grip in order to chatter the entire body of your clay, even down to here. Like, potters who don't need to use Giffen grip can very easily just anchor down and do this with a suction technique, maybe even, but like, if you only use Giffen grip for your whole trimming experience, you can't do this.